The cardboard beneath my back had grown soft from 3 months of body heat and the occasional leak from the Honda's sunroof. I pressed my palm against the car window, watching the condensation from my breath fog the glass in small, perfect circles. Outside, the streetlight cast long shadows across the empty parking lot behind the defunct grocery store where I'd been sleeping since October. My daughter Zora's voice still echoed in my head from our last phone call. "Just sleep in your car a little longer. Mom, I'm busy with the baby coming and all. You understand, right?" I understood more than she knew. The flood had taken my little house on Maple Street, my photographs, my mother's quilt, 40 years of carefully collected memories. Insurance covered the structure, but not the life in it. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. At 62, I found myself with nothing but a 12-year-old Honda Civic and the clothes I'd managed to salvage from the muddy wreckage. After 35 years teaching high school English, my retirement savings had been modest but sufficient. Now they were dwindling rapidly, stretched thin between basic necessities and the occasional motel room when Ohio's winter nights turned dangerously cold. I hadn't planned on homelessness in my 60s. Then again, no one ever does. The rain started as a gentle patter against the roof, but quickly intensified. I checked the towel I'd strategically placed where the sunroof leaked, already damp. My hands, with their prominent veins and age spots, looked foreign in the dim light. When had I become this old woman, huddled in a car, forgotten by the world? I remembered the day the flood warnings came. The river had been rising for days after the relentless spring rains. I'd moved a few precious items upstairs, photo albums, my mother's quilt, important documents. Not enough. The water rose faster than anyone predicted, 6 feet in less than an hour. By the time the rescue boats came through our neighborhood, my entire first floor was submerged. The insurance adjuster had been sympathetic but firm. "Structure coverage only. Ms. Ainsley, contents aren't included in your policy." Meredith Ainsley. That was my name, though lately I felt more like a ghost than a person. Transparent, unseen. Zora had seemed sympathetic at first. "Of course you can stay with us temporarily, Mom, just until you get back on your feet." But temporary had stretched into uncomfortable, and uncomfortable had become impossible when her husband Thaddeus started leaving passive-aggressive notes about utility bills and grocery costs taped to the refrigerator. "You used the air conditioning all day yesterday while we were at work. Our electric bill is already sky high. Organic milk is $7 a gallon. Regular milk works just fine." Each note, written in as precise architect's handwriting, had felt like a paper cut, small but painful. The wounds accumulating day by day. The rain intensified, drumming against the roof. I shifted to avoid a new leak forming near my feet. At least the car still ran, though the check engine light had been glowing ominously for weeks. If it died, I didn't know what I'd do. It was my shelter, my one remaining asset, my last barrier between myself and complete destitution. My phone buzzed against my chest. A text from Zora. "Hope you're doing okay. Thaddeus got the promotion. We're looking at bigger houses now. Baby number 2 is due in spring." I stared at the message until the screen went dark, then set the phone aside without responding. She hoped I was doing okay while sleeping in a car in December in Ohio, while she celebrated promotions in house hunting and expanding families. Sleep came in restless fragments that night, broken by the rain, the cold, and dreams of drowning. 6 weeks earlier, I'd still been living in Zora and Thaddeus's guest room. The room was small but comfortable, decorated in the same sleek, modern aesthetic as the rest of their home. Everything in their house was new and carefully curated. Thaddeus was an architect with a growing reputation for minimalist design, and their home served as a showcase for prospective clients. I felt like an antique in that house, worn and out of place among the clean lines and neutral colors. Zora worked as a marketing executive for a luxury real estate firm. Between her and Thaddeus, they made more money than I ever had as a teacher, but there was always tension about finances. They had expensive tastes and aspirations that seemed to perpetually outpace even their substantial income. The only true joy in that house was my granddaughter Willow. At 18 months old, she was a whirlwind of curiosity and affection, with Zora's curly hair and my own gray-blue eyes. Gamma, she'd squeal when I appeared in the morning, arms outstretched for a hug. Those moments made everything else bearable. I tried to make myself useful. I cooked dinner most evenings, kept the house spotless, and watched Willow when their nanny called in sick. I minimized my presence when Thaddeus was home, keeping to my room or taking long walks around the neighborhood. It wasn't enough. One evening in early October, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I overheard Zora and Thaddeus talking in their home office. The door was slightly ajar, and their voices carried clearly. "How much longer is she staying?" Thaddeus asked. "It's been over a month." "What am I supposed to do?" Zora's voice was defensive. "She lost everything in that flood. She has insurance money. She should be looking for an apartment." "The insurance barely covered the mortgage payoff. There's nothing left." A heavy sigh from Thaddeus. "We need our space back. Zora, especially with the baby coming." My wooden spoon froze mid-stir. "Baby? What baby?" "I know," Zora said, her voice softer now. "I'm just not sure how to tell her. She's been through so much already." "Tell her we need the room for a nursery," which is true. I haven't even told her I'm pregnant yet. My heart hammered in my chest. A second grandchild on the way. And Zora hadn't told me. How long had she known? How many doctor's appointments had she gone to without mentioning a word to me? "Look," Thaddeus continued, "I know she's your mother, but we have to think about our family first. Our growing family. The guest room needs to be a nursery. And frankly, having your mother here is stressful. She's always around, always watching. I feel like I can't relax in my own home. She tries to be helpful. Too helpful. I don't need her rearranging my office or washing my dress shirts incorrectly. And the way she looks at me when I come home late like I'm neglecting you or something. She's just protective. She's judgmental. And I want her gone before we announce the pregnancy to everyone else. Can you imagine how awkward it will be? She'll expect to stay even longer to help with the baby." The sauce I was stirring began to burn, filling the kitchen with an acrid smell. I quickly moved the pot off the heat, but my hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. The conversation continued, but I couldn't bear to hear more. That night, I lay awake in the carefully decorated guest room, the future nursery, planning my exit. My own daughter was keeping secrets from me, while her husband counted the days until my departure. I'd become an inconvenience, an unwelcome guest overstaying her welcome. The next morning, Zora was feeding Willow breakfast when I entered the kitchen, my few belongings already packed into 2 suitcases. "I've been thinking," I said, keeping my voice casual. "It's time I found my own place." Zora looked up from the high chair, surprise and relief battling on her face. "Oh, where are you thinking of looking?" "I have a few options." I lied. "I don't want to be a burden any longer." "You're not a burden, Mom." But her eyes couldn't meet mine, and I knew she was thinking of the nursery that would soon replace any trace of my presence. "Well, regardless, I think it's time. I've called a few places, and I'm going to look at them today." "That's great." Her relief was palpable now. "You know you can always visit, right? Willow loves having you around." Behind her, Thaddeus entered the kitchen, catching the tail end of our conversation. He didn't bother hiding his satisfaction. "Moving on to better things. Louise, good for you." He never called me Meredith, always Louise, as if determined to keep me at a formal distance. "Hopefully," I said, forcing a smile. "It's time I stood on my own 2 feet again." "Well, we're here if you need anything," he offered magnanimously, knowing I would never ask. I kissed Willow goodbye, inhaling the sweet baby scent of her hair one last time. "Bye-bye, my little sunshine," I whispered. She patted my cheek with sticky fingers, oblivious to the fact that this was more than a casual departure. As I loaded my suitcases into the Honda, I glanced back at the house. Zora stood in the doorway, one hand resting unconsciously on her still flat stomach. She gave a small wave, then turned back inside before I had even pulled away from the curb. I had nowhere to go, but they didn't need to know that. The first night in my car, I parked in a Walmart lot, having heard that they sometimes allowed overnight parking. I reclined the driver's seat as far as it would go and covered myself with my coat, too wired with anxiety to sleep. Every passing car, every shadow made my heart race. I'd never felt so vulnerable. By morning, I was exhausted and disoriented. I used the Walmart bathroom to wash my face and brush my teeth, avoiding eye contact with other shoppers. Did they know, could they tell I was homeless that day? I drove to the public library, a place I'd always found comforting. The librarian, Octavia Reynolds, greeted me with a smile. She knew me from my teaching days. I'd brought students on field trips to the library for research projects many times over the years. Meredith, how lovely to see you. I heard about your house, such a terrible thing. How are you holding up? I managed what I hoped was a convincing smile, taking it day by day. Actually, I'm apartment hunting. Thought I'd use the computers here to look at listings. Of course, take all the time you need. The library became my daytime sanctuary. I'd arrive when they opened at 9 a.m. and stay until closing at 8 p.m. I applied for jobs, researched assistance programs, and searched for affordable housing. But affordable housing in our area was scarce. Waiting lists were long, and my fixed income made most apartments out of reach. As for jobs, who wanted to hire a 62-year-old retired English teacher? I applied for retail positions, administrative work, even dog walking. The few interviews I secured ended with polite rejection emails or, more often, no response at all. My retirement savings dwindled alarmingly. Some nights, when the temperature dropped below freezing, I'd splurge on a cheap motel room. Most nights, I slept in the car, parked behind an abandoned grocery store where I was less likely to be disturbed. I developed a routine: library by day, car by night, shower at the YMCA twice a week using a day pass. Meals from fast food dollar menus or canned goods I could open without cooking. I kept my phone charged at the library and carefully rationed my data when away from Wi-Fi. Zora texted occasionally, brief messages about Willow or her work. I responded with equal brevity, never revealing my circumstances. Pride, perhaps, or the knowledge that any admission of my true situation would be met with uncomfortable obligation rather than genuine concern. One evening in late October, Octavia approached my computer station just before closing time. "Meredith," she said quietly, "forgive me for asking, but are you living in your car?" My face burned with shame. Had I become so transparent? "What makes you think that?" Her eyes were kind, not pitying. "You're here every day, all day. You bring all your belongings with you. And yesterday, I saw you sleeping in your car in the parking lot after we closed." I couldn't speak past the lump in my throat. "I'm not judging," she continued gently. "I just want to help if I can." The dam broke then. In hushed tones, I told her everything: the flood, my dwindling savings, Zora and Thaddeus's thinly veiled relief at my departure, the nights spent huddled in my car. Octavia listened without interruption. When I finished, she took my hand across the table. "My sister runs a women's shelter. It's not ideal, but it's safe and warm. Let me call her." A shelter, the word stuck in my throat. How had I come to this just temporarily until something better comes along? But the shelter was full. There was a waiting list of 3 weeks. Octavia offered her own spare room, but I couldn't impose on her kindness. She had her own life, her own family. I was not her responsibility. Instead, I accepted a bag of toiletries, some non-perishable food, and a blanket she insisted on giving me. "At least let me check on you," she said. "Text me every evening so I know you're safe." It was the most genuine concern anyone had shown me in months. November brought colder temperatures and the first snow. I developed a persistent cough that rattled in my chest. My arthritis flared in the damp cold, making my joints ache constantly. I rationed my medications, skipping doses to make them last longer. Thanksgiving loomed on the horizon. Zora called, her voice overly bright. Mom, we want you to come for Thanksgiving dinner. It wouldn't be the same without you. Was this an olive branch? A genuine desire for my company? Or obligation? That sounds lovely, I said, suppressing a cough. What can I bring? Just yourself. Thaddeus is smoking a turkey, and I'm handling the seats. You can help with Willow. Of course. They needed a babysitter while they cooked. The day before Thanksgiving, I spent nearly half my remaining cash on a motel room. I needed to shower, to wash my clothes, to appear as though my life wasn't falling apart. I couldn't let Zora see how far I'd fallen. Couldn't bear the mix of pity and discomfort that would cross her face. Their house was warm and fragrant with roasting turkey when I arrived. Willow ran to me, arms outstretched, and for a moment, everything else fell away. Gamma up, she demanded, and I scooped her into my arms, ignoring the protest from my aching back. Zora emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. She looked radiant, her pregnancy now slightly showing in the gentle curve of her belly. Mom, you look. She hesitated, her eyes taking in my too thin frame, the dark circles under my eyes that concealer hadn't quite masked. Tired. Are you feeling okay? Just a little cold. Nothing serious. I bounced Willow on my hip, using her as a distraction. This little one has grown so much in just a few weeks. Thaddeus appeared in the doorway, cocktail in hand. Louise, glad you could make it. His eyes narrowed slightly. You're not contagious, are you? We can't afford to have Willow getting sick right now. Before I could answer, Zora jumped in. I'm sure Mom wouldn't come if she was really sick, right? Mom, it's just a cold, I repeated. The meal was delicious but tense. I picked at my food, my appetite diminished by anxiety and the persistent nausea that had accompanied my cold. Thaddeus dominated the conversation with talk of his promotion, their house hunting, and the nursery designs he was considering. We're looking at properties in Lakewood Hills, he said, naming the most exclusive neighborhood in the area. With the new baby coming, we need more space, and the schools are excellent. That sounds lovely, I murmured, though the thought of them moving even further up the socio-economic ladder while I slept in my car created a bitter taste in my mouth. Mom, we have news, Zora said suddenly. We're having another baby. I feigned surprise, exclaiming appropriately and asking all the right questions. When was she due? Did they know the gender? How was she feeling? We're turning the guest room into a nursery, Thaddeus added, a pointed reminder that my former space was being repurposed. Construction starts next week. After dinner, while Zora and Thaddeus cleaned up, I sat with Willow in the living room, reading her favorite book. My chest felt tight, each breath a struggle, but I pushed through, focusing on my granddaughter's delight. Mom, Zora called from the kitchen. Could you put Willow down for her nap? We need to finish cleaning up. I carried Willow upstairs, tucking her into her crib and with a lullaby. As she drifted off to sleep, I stroked her soft curls, tears blurring my vision. How many moments like this would I miss as she grew? How much of her childhood would pass without me present downstairs? Zora and Thaddeus were having a hushed conversation that abruptly stopped when I entered the room. I should get going, I said, reaching for my coat. Thank you for dinner. So soon, Zora asked, though her relief was evident. We thought you might stay for dessert later. I'm a bit tired. This cold has taken a lot out of me. Well, drive safely. Text when you get home. Home, such a simple word, so casually used. I no longer had one. In the car, I broke into a coughing fit so violent it left me gasping for air. My chest burned and my head pounded. I needed rest, real rest. Not another night contorted in the backseat of my Honda. I drove to the motel I'd stayed at the night before, but the vacancy sign was dark. Everywhere was booked for the holiday weekend. In desperation, I parked at my usual spot behind the abandoned grocery store and reclined the seat as far as it would go. The temperature dropped throughout the night. Rain turned to sleet, then snow. I wrapped myself in every piece of clothing I had, but the cold seeped into my bones. My cough worsened, each spasm sending knives of pain through my chest. By morning, I could barely breathe. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Octavia. I'd forgotten to check in the night before. As I reached to call her back, a wave of dizziness washed over me. The phone slipped from my fingers, and darkness closed in from the edges of my vision. My last conscious thought was of Willow's face, her tiny hands patting my cheeks. Gamma. She called me Gamma. I couldn't leave her yet. I wasn't ready. Then nothing. I awoke to the steady beep of monitors and the antiseptic smell of a hospital room. For a moment, I thought I was back in the flood, being rescued from my submerged house. But the pain in my chest and the IV in my arm told a different story. "She's awake," a familiar voice said. Octavia's face appeared above me, lined with concern. What happened? My voice was a rasp, barely audible. "Pneumonia," she said. "I got worried when you didn't check in. Found you unconscious in your car. You've been here for 3 days. 3 days I tried to sit up, but my body refused to cooperate." "Easy," Octavia cautioned. "You were severely dehydrated and hypothermic on top of the pneumonia. The doctor says you're lucky to be alive." Lucky wasn't the word I would have chosen. Embarrassed, ashamed, terrified of the hospital bill that was accumulating with every beep of the monitors. "Does Zora know?" I asked. Octavia's expression turned guarded. "I called her the first day. She said she'd come, but she hadn't. Of course not. A sick homeless mother wasn't part of her carefully curated life." "It's okay," I said, though it wasn't. "She's busy." The pregnancy, her job. Octavia's face said everything her words didn't. What kind of daughter doesn't come when her mother is hospitalized? The doctor confirmed severe pneumonia, exacerbated by exposure and poor nutrition. I would need to stay at least another week, followed by rest and recovery in a warm, clean environment. "Do you have someone who can look after you?" he asked, glancing at my chart. "Family nearby." "She'll be staying with me," Octavia said before I could answer. Her tone brooked no argument. I was too weak to protest, too grateful for her kindness. The hospital days passed in a blur of medications, breathing treatments, and fitful sleep. Octavia visited daily, bringing books and companionship. Zora called once, her voice tight with awkward concern. "I'd come see you, but I can't risk getting sick. The baby, you know." "Of course," I said. "I understand. Do you have somewhere to go when they release you, your apartment?" I hesitated, pride battling with practicality. "Yes, I've made arrangements." "Good, that's good. Well, get better soon. Okay, Willow keeps asking for you." It was the closest thing to genuine emotion I'd heard from her in months. On my 5th day in the hospital, a nurse brought in my personal effects, the contents of my pockets when I'd been admitted. My phone was dead, but I plugged it into the bedside charger. As soon as it powered on, notifications began flooding the screen. Most were from Octavia, from before she'd found me. But there was also an email from an unfamiliar address, Harrison Blackwell and Associates, estate attorneys. Curious, I opened it. "Dear Ms. Ainsley, we represent the estate of your late aunt, Winifred Holloway. We have been attempting to locate you regarding a bequest in her will. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to discuss the inheritance she has left you." I stared at the screen, certain I was hallucinating. Aunt Winnie, my mother's older sister, who'd moved to California in the 1980s, I'd assumed she'd died years ago. We'd exchanged letters and occasional phone calls for a while after she left. But the correspondence had tapered off over the decades. With shaking fingers, I called the number in the email. The receptionist transferred me to a Mr. Phoenix Blackwood, who confirmed the legitimacy of the email. "Ms. Ainsley, thank you for returning our call. We've been trying to reach you for several weeks. Your aunt, Winifred Holloway, passed away on September 30th, just after the flood, while I was still living with Zora and Thaddeus." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, genuine grief mixing with confusion. But I don't understand why you're contacting me. Winnie and I haven't spoken in years. Ms. Holloway named you as her sole beneficiary. She has left you her entire estate. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. Her entire estate, but what does that include? Her home in Pasadena, California, investment accounts, life insurance. The property is worth approximately $850,000. The liquid assets total another $320,000. There are some debts to settle, but you're looking at inheriting well over $1 million. Ms. Ainsley, $1 million. The words seemed to hover in the air, impossible and miraculous. From homeless to millionaire in the span of a phone call. There must be some mistake, I managed. Why would she leave everything to me? According to the notes in our file, you were her only living relative. She updated her will 6 months ago, specifically naming you as her sole heir. There's also a letter she left for you, which we've been holding until we could locate you. I ended the call in a daze, promising to come to their office as soon as I was released from the hospital. A letter. Winnie had left me a letter, along with a fortune I couldn't begin to comprehend. That evening, when Octavia visited, I shared the impossible news. Winnie, she repeated, your mother's sister, the one who moved to California. I nodded, still stunned. She left me everything, her house, her savings, over $1 million, according to the lawyer. Octavia's face split into a wide smile. Meredith, that's incredible. A miracle. It doesn't feel real, but it is real. You're not homeless anymore. You have options now. Options? Such a simple word for such a profound concept. I could go anywhere, do anything. I could help Zora and Thaddeus with a down payment on their dream home. I could set up a college fund for Willow and the new baby. Or I could start over somewhere else. Somewhere warm. Somewhere where I wasn't just an inconvenient old woman taking up space. The house is in Pasadena, I said slowly. I've never been to California. Octavia watched me carefully. Are you thinking of moving there? I don't know. Maybe. There's nothing holding me here except Willow, except the fragile hope that Zora might someday value my presence for more than occasional babysitting. Except your family. Octavia finished for me. What family? The words came out bitter, surprising us both. My daughter didn't even visit me in the hospital. Her husband counts the days until I'm gone. I slept in my car for 3 months while they shopped for bigger houses. People make mistakes. Meredith, even family. Some mistakes can't be undone. That night, alone in my hospital room, I thought about Winnie. She'd left Ohio in her 40s after a bitter argument with my mother. I never knew the details, only that it had something to do with Winnie's lifestyle choices, a phrase my mother used with pursed lips and disapproving eyes. Winnie had sent me postcards from across California as she traveled. Later, letters from Pasadena, where she'd settled. She'd been a teacher too, high school science rather than English. We'd had that in common. The correspondence had dwindled over the years, especially after my mother died. An occasional Christmas card, a brief note when I sent news of Zora's birth. I'd sent her a wedding announcement when Zora married Thaddeus, but never heard back. I'd assumed she was gone, another link to my past severed by time and distance. But she'd remembered me enough to leave me everything she had, the day I was discharged from the hospital. Octavia drove me to her apartment, a cozy 2-bedroom in a well-maintained complex. Her guest room was small but comfortable, with a real bed and clean sheets. After months in my car, it felt like luxury. Stay as long as you need, she insisted. At least until you're fully recovered. I was too weak to argue, too grateful for her kindness. That afternoon, while Octavia was at work, I used her laptop to search for information about Winnie's house in Pasadena. The property records were public, and I found it easily, a 1920s craftsman bungalow on a tree-lined street. The tax assessment valued it at just over $800,000, but in California's housing market, it was likely worth more. I used Google Street View to virtually walk down Winnie's street, marveling at the mature trees and well-maintained homes. It was beautiful, a far cry from the abandoned parking lot where I'd nearly died. My phone chimed with a text from Zora. Heard you're out of the hospital. Feeling better. Much better, I replied. Staying with a friend while I recover. Good. Let us know when you're up for visitors. Willow misses you. No mention of missing me herself. No offer to help with my recovery. Just Willow. The emotional currency she used to maintain the barest minimum of a relationship. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my email and wrote to Phoenix Blackwood, asking about the process for claiming my inheritance and inquiring about Winnie's letter. He responded within the hour, professional and efficient. We scheduled a meeting for the following week. Once I was stronger, he'd bring all the necessary paperwork, as well as Winnie's letter. That night, I dreamed of California sunshine and orange trees. In the dream, Winnie was there. Though her face was hazy, it had been decades since I'd seen her. She was showing me around a garden, pointing out flowers and trees with obvious pride. It's yours now, Dream Winnie said. All of it. The garden, the house, the life I built. Why me? I asked. Why not someone closer to you? She smiled, the details of her face coming into focus. She had our family's gray-blue eyes, the same ones I'd passed to Zora, who'd passed them to Willow. Because you understand what it means to start over, she said. And because some doors close so others can open. I woke with tears on my face and a clarity I hadn't felt in months. 3 days later, a courier delivered a large envelope from Harrison Blackwell and Associates. Inside was a smaller envelope, yellowed with age, with my name written in Winnie's distinctive handwriting. I recognized it from the letter she'd sent decades ago. With trembling hands, I opened it. Dear Meredith, if you're reading this, I've left this world behind. Don't be sad. I've had a good, long life filled with more joy than sorrow. That's all any of us can ask for. I've left you everything I have. You might wonder why. After all these years of silence, the truth is, I've followed your life from afar. Your mother and I reconciled enough before her death for her to send me occasional updates. Later, I found you on social media, though I never had the courage to reach out directly. I know about your teaching career, your divorce, Zora's wedding. I even know about little Willow. She has our family's eyes. Doesn't she? I've seen photos. Recently, I learned about the flood that took your home. I wanted to contact you then, to offer help, but old habits die hard. Your mother and I had a complicated relationship, as you know. She never approved of my lifestyle choices, her euphemism for my love for Eleanor, my partner of 37 years until her passing in 2019. After Eleanor died, I had to decide what to do with what we'd built together. I have no children. Eleanor's son never accepted our relationship and hasn't spoken to us in decades. But you, Meredith, you were always kind, always accepting, even when you were young and didn't fully understand. So I'm giving you a fresh start, a home that needs someone to love it, a life that needs to be lived. Take it with my blessing, and know that it comes with no strings attached. Stay in Ohio if that's where your heart is. Sell the house if you prefer. The money is yours to use as you see fit. But if I might offer one piece of advice from an old woman who's seen her share of life, don't let others define your worth. Not family, not friends, not society. You are more than what you can do for others. Remember that. With love and hope for your next chapter. Winnie, I read the letter 3 times, tears blurring the words. Winnie had known about the flood, had wanted to help. Had she known I was homeless? Had she somehow sensed how desperate my situation had become? And Eleanor, her partner of 37 years, the lifestyle choice my mother had disapproved of. It all made sense now. The estrangement, the distance. Winnie had found love that my mother couldn't accept. And rather than compromise, she'd built a new life 3,000 miles away. Now she was offering me the same chance. A new life. A fresh start. That evening, I asked Octavia to drive me past Zora and Thaddeus's house. I didn't want to go in, just needed to see it from the outside. The house looked the same as always, perfectly maintained. tastefully decorated for the holidays with minimalist white lights outlining the roof and windows. Thaddeus's car was in the driveway, along with a luxury SUV I didn't recognize. Guests, perhaps, or a new vehicle purchase I hadn't been told about. "Do you want me to wait while you go in?" Octavia asked. I shook my head. "No, I just needed to see it." "Are you going to tell them about the inheritance?" I thought about Thaddeus's notes on the refrigerator, about Zora's casual dismissal of my homelessness, about sleeping in my car while they shopped for bigger houses. "Not yet," my boss said. "I need to figure some things out first." Back at Octavia's apartment, I booked a one-way ticket to Los Angeles for the following week. Harrison Blackwell and Associates had arranged for a car service to meet me at the airport and take me directly to Winnie's house, my house now, where Blackwood would meet me with the keys and final paperwork. I was going to California. I was going to see the house Winnie had left me, to read her letter in the space she'd shared with Eleanor for 37 years. I was going to decide, on my own terms, what my next chapter would look like. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in months, dreaming of sunshine and new beginnings. The morning of my flight, I wrote a brief note to Zora. "I'm taking some time away to focus on my health and future. I'll be in touch when I'm settled. Kiss Willow for me. Love, Mom." I didn't mention California, didn't mention the inheritance. Those revelations could wait until I'd seen Winnie's house, my house with my own eyes, until I'd decided what I wanted my life to look like now that I had options again. As Octavia drove me to the airport, Ohio's winter landscape passed by the window gray skies, bare trees, patches of dirty snow. I didn't feel sad to leave it behind, only curious about what waited for me on the other side of the country. "You'll let me know how it goes," Octavia asked as she helped me with my single suitcase at the departure drop-off. "Of course, and thank you for everything. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me that day." She hugged me tightly. "Just promise me you'll take care of yourself. And remember, you can always come back if California isn't what you hoped." But as I walked into the terminal, I realized I had no desire to look back, only forward, toward whatever new life awaited me in Pasadena. The California sun felt like forgiveness against my face as I stepped off the plane at LAX. For 3 months, I'd lived under Ohio's gray winter sky, sleeping in the shadow of abandoned buildings and strip malls. Here, even in December, the air carried warmth and the promise of new beginnings. Harrison Blackwell and Associates had arranged for a car service to take me directly to the property. The driver, a weathered man named Renwick Mason, spoke with the easy familiarity of someone who'd lived in Los Angeles his entire life. "First time in California?" he asked, navigating the freeway with practiced ease. "First time in 40 years, I replied, watching palm trees flash past the window like exclamation points against the blue sky. "What brings you back?" "An inheritance. From an aunt I barely knew." Renwick's eyes found mine in the rearview mirror. "Funny how family works sometimes. The ones you think you can count on disappoint you, and the ones you forget about save your life." I thought about Zora's text messages, cheerful updates about nursery shopping and mortgage pre-approvals sent to a woman sleeping in a car. "Yes," I said quietly. "Funny how that works." The neighborhood in Pasadena surprised me with its quiet charm. Tree-lined streets with craftsman bungalows and Spanish revival homes, many dating back to the 1920s. Nothing like the sterile, modern subdivisions Thaddeus preferred. We turned onto Craftsman Avenue, and Renwick slowed the car. "That's it there," he said, pointing to a blue bungalow on the corner. "Pretty place." The house exceeded the photographs I'd seen online. A 1920s craftsman with original woodwork, a deep front porch that wrapped around two shinnies, and mature oak trees shading the property. Despite needing paint and some obvious repairs, it had the solid bones of a home built to last. Phoenix Blackwood met me at the front gate, a slim man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and an expensive suit. He looked genuinely surprised when I climbed out of the car service. "Ms. Ainsley, welcome. I was expecting, well, someone different." I looked down at my worn jeans and thrift store sweater, the nicest clothes I owned. Different house, Swam. Your aunt spoke of you often in her final years. She made it sound like you were quite successful, established. I assumed. He trailed off, perhaps noticing the way I gripped the gate for support as I looked at the house that was now mine. My aunt was remembering me from 40 years ago, I said. People change, circumstances change. Inside, the house told the story of a woman who'd lived alone, but not lonely. Every room was filled with books, plants, and carefully chosen antiques. The kitchen had been updated sometime in the 1990s, and while dated, everything was clean and functional. Aunt Winnie had left behind not just a house, but a complete life. The neighbors had been maintaining the yard and collecting mail, Mr. Blackwood explained as we walked through rooms that smelled of lavender and old books. Mrs. Montgomery next door has a key. She's been quite concerned about what would happen to the place. In the living room, I ran my hand over a baby grand piano in the corner, wondering if Winnie or Eleanor had played. The walls were lined with bookshelves interrupted only by windows and framed photographs. Did my aunt leave any personal records? Letters, journals? There's a study upstairs with filing cabinets and a desk. Everything is yours now. Of course. In the master bedroom, I found photographs on the dresser. Winnie as a young woman, then middle-aged, then elderly, but always smiling. In several pictures, she wasn't alone. A tall woman with silver hair appeared in photos spanning decades, companions at dinner tables, on vacation, gardening together in what I recognized as this very backyard. Was my aunt married? I asked, though I knew the answer from her letter. Mr. Blackwood cleared his throat. She shared her life with someone, yes, Patricia Hayes. They were together for 37 years before Patricia passed in 2019. Your aunt never quite recovered from that loss. Patricia, not Eleanor as Winnie had written in her letter. Perhaps she'd used a different name in her letter for some reason. I picked up a photograph of the two women, both in their 70s, hands intertwined as they sat on this same front porch. The love between them was visible even in a still image, the way Winnie leaned into Patricia, the way Patricia's thumb traced circles on Winnie's knuckles. Did Patricia have family? A son in Oregon who never visited. He contested the will when Patricia left everything to your aunt. Quite bitter about it, according to Winnie. I understood then why Winnie had chosen me. Not because we'd been close, but because we'd both learned that family wasn't always about blood, and that love given freely was rarer than love expected by right. The paperwork took hours: bank accounts, investment portfolios, insurance policies, a paper trail of a life carefully planned and responsibly managed. Winnie had been a retired teacher who'd invested wisely and lived modestly. She'd owned this house outright for 15 years. The liquid assets total $347,000 after taxes and fees, Mr. Blackwood explained. The house is valued at $865,000 though in this market. It could sell for considerably more. Your aunt also maintained a small life insurance policy that brings the total inheritance to just over $1.2 million. The numbers felt abstract, like prices for items in a store I'd never imagined shopping in. But what felt real was the house around me, the weight of keys in my palm, the knowledge that I had a home again. After Mr. Blackwood left, I walked through the rooms again, this time alone. In the kitchen, I found a note taped to the refrigerator in careful handwriting. For whoever feeds the plants and collects my mail, there's wine in the pantry and cookies in the blue tin. Help yourself, W. I smiled at this glimpse of Winnie's personality, practical, thoughtful, generous even in small ways. As twilight settled over the neighborhood, I knocked on the door of the house next door. A woman in her 70s answered, her face lighting up when I introduced myself. You're Winnie's niece. Oh, honey. She talked about you constantly. Meredith this, Meredith that. She was so proud of you. Delphine Montgomery ushered me inside for coffee and what turned out to be 3 hours of stories about my aunt. Her home was similar to Winnie's in layout, but decorated in warm earth tones with southwestern textiles. Winnie and Patricia were fixtures in this neighborhood for decades, she told me, serving coffee in delicate china cups. They hosted the best garden parties, volunteered at the library, helped start the community garden 3 blocks over. Were they happy, I asked, needing to know more about the life Winnie had built after leaving Ohio. Deliriously, Delphine said with a soft smile. Not that they didn't have their struggles. Patricia's son refused to acknowledge their relationship for years, and there was some family drama from Ohio Winnie's sister. I believe, my mother, I confirmed. They had a falling out when Winnie moved away. She worried about you, especially this past year, Delphine continued. She had a feeling you were going through something difficult. She wanted to reach out, but didn't want to intrude. Meredith is strong, she'd say, but everyone needs help sometimes. I thought about the months I'd spent sleeping in my car, the careful rationing of every dollar, the slow erosion of dignity that comes with having nowhere to go. Winnie had somehow sensed my struggle from 2,000 miles away, while my own daughter, living 30 minutes from me, had seen it as an inconvenience to her expanding lifestyle. She changed her will 6 months ago, Delphine continued, added a provision that if anything happened to her, I should watch for you. She said, you might not know about the inheritance right away, and you might need extra kindness when you arrive. The thought of Winnie planning for my arrival, even after her death, brought tears to my eyes. This woman I barely knew had shown more concern for my welfare than my own daughter. That evening, I stood on Winnie's my front porch, and called Zora for the first time since arriving in California. Mom, finally, I was starting to worry. Where are you, California? And I said simply, California, what are you doing there? Did you find a job? Something like that. I watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink that I'd forgotten existed. I inherited a house. Silence. Then what do you mean, inherited? My Aunt Winnie died. She left me her house and some money. Aunt Winnie, I thought she died years ago. A pause. How much money? There it was. Not, I'm so sorry for your loss, or how wonderful that you have a home again. Just how much money? Enough, I said. Well, that's fantastic news. Zora's voice turned bright, calculating. Frank and I were just talking about how we could help you get back on your feet. This solves everything. When are you coming home? Home as if the car I'd been sleeping in for 3 months was home, as if the parking lot behind a defunct grocery store was where I belonged. I'm not sure I am coming home. Zora. Another pause. What do you mean your life is here? Emma misses her grandmother, and with the new baby coming. You seem to manage just fine with me sleeping in my car for 3 months. Mom, that's not fair. Not fair. You knew I was homeless and did nothing. We offered to let you stay with us for 6 weeks until Thaddeus got tired of seeing me. That's not... Look, maybe we didn't handle things perfectly, but we're family. This inheritance is wonderful. But you don't need to run away to California. We can help you find a nice place here close to us. Close to them. Close enough to be convenient when they needed babysitting or help with household projects, but not so close as to be a daily reminder of their capacity for callousness. I need to think about things, I said. Think about what, Mom? You're not making sense. Come home, we'll figure this out together. But as I looked out at the garden Winnie and Patricia had planted together, at the neighborhood where people left notes for each other and watched over empty houses, I realized I might already be home. I'll call you in a few days, I said and hung up before Zora could respond. That night, I slept in a real bed for the first time in months. Winnie's bed in Winnie's house, surrounded by the accumulated comfort of a life well lived. The sheets smelled like lavender, and through the open window, I could hear the gentle rustle of orange trees in the backyard, but sleep didn't come easily. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from Zora, each one more urgent than the last. Mom, call me back. We need to talk about this properly. Thaddeus thinks you're not thinking clearly. We're worried about you. Thaddeus thinks. Of course Thaddeus had an opinion about my inheritance, about my choices. About my life, Thaddeus. Who'd left notes about utility bills when I was homeless? Thaddeus, who was now, according to Zora's earlier texts, looking at bigger houses and planning bigger families. I turned off my phone and lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of my new neighborhood. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed through the night. Cars passed occasionally, their headlights briefly illuminating the bedroom walls. Tomorrow, I would begin the work of building a new life. Tomorrow, I would decide who deserved to be part of it. But tonight, for the first time in months, I was warm, safe, and sleeping in a place that belonged to me. The study on the second floor became my sanctuary in those first days. A small room lined with bookshelves and filing cabinets, with a desk positioned in front of windows overlooking the backyard. Winnie had been meticulously organized, with folders labeled by year and subject. I found photographs I'd never seen Winnie as a young teacher in the 1960s, Winnie and Patricia at political rallies in the 1970s, their house purchase in 1983. There were letters too, decades of correspondence with friends across the country, and there was a folder labeled simply Family. Inside, I found my high school graduation announcement, wedding invitation, birth announcement for Zora, Christmas cards I'd sent over the years, newspaper clippings about my teaching awards, a printout of Zora's wedding announcement from the local paper. Most surprising was a recent folder labeled Meredith 2023-2024. Inside were printouts of news articles about the flooding in Ohio, a property record search for my house on Maple Street, a printout of Zora's social media page showing photos of Willow, and at the back of the folder, I found a letter addressed to me, dated just 2 weeks before Winnie died. It had never been sent. Dear Meredith, I've been following the news about the flooding in Ohio. Your town was hit particularly hard, and I can't stop thinking about you. I know we haven't spoken in years, a failing on my part as much as circumstance. I've drafted this letter a dozen times, unsure whether to send it. Would you welcome hearing from me after all this time? Would you accept help if I offered it? I have resources I'd gladly share, but pride is a family trait we both inherited in abundance. Patricia used to say I was stubborn as an oak tree, rooted so deeply in my positions that I couldn't bend even when I should. She was right. Of course. She usually was. I've made arrangements with my attorney to find you if anything happens to me. You're my only living blood relative. And while that might not have meant much to your mother, it means something to me. I hope you're safe and dry. I hope that daughter of yours is taking good care of you. If you ever find yourself needing a fresh start, my door is always open. Love, Winnie. She'd known, somehow, she'd known I would need help, even before the worst of my circumstances unfolded, and she'd tried to reach out, hampered by the same pride and uncertainty that had kept me from asking Zora for help when I needed it most. In a filing cabinet in the corner, I found financial records, decades of careful investments, retirement planning, and household management. Winnie and Patricia had lived well but frugally, allowing their wealth to grow. There were charitable donations, regular gifts to organizations supporting LGBTQ youth, women's shelters, and educational foundations. And there was a key taped to the inside of the file drawer, labeled Safe Deposit Box, Pasadena First National, Box 247. The next morning, I took a cab to the bank. The manager was expecting me. Mr. Blackwood had called ahead to inform them of Winnie's passing and my inheritance. The safe deposit box contained jewelry, some bearer bonds, and a stack of letters tied with faded ribbon. The jewelry was beautiful but modest, a strand of pearls, a few gold pieces, an emerald ring that must have been Patricia's, given the engraving inside, to P, my heart's true home, W. The letters were a correspondence between Winnie and my mother spanning 40 years, including the years after their supposed estrangement. The most recent was dated just months before my mother's death 5 years ago. I didn't read them there in the bank, but took everything home, feeling like I was carrying precious artifacts from an archaeological dig into my own family's hidden history. That evening, seated at Winnie's desk in the study, I began reading the letters chronologically. The early ones were warm and sisterly, full of news about their lives and gentle teasing. Then came the letter from 1983 when Winnie wrote that she and her roommate Patricia had purchased a house together. My mother's response was cold, judgmental. I can't pretend to understand or approve of the choices you're making. Mother and father would be heartbroken to see you living this way. I pray you'll come to your senses before it's too late. Winnie's reply was dignified but firm. I am 43 years old, not a confused teenager. Patricia is my partner in every sense of the word. We love each other. That's not going to change. And I won't pretend otherwise, even for you. I hope someday you'll meet her and see what I see. The correspondence stopped for several years after that. Then, surprisingly, it resumed in 1990 with a tentative letter from my mother. Meredith is getting married next spring. Despite our differences, you're her aunt, and I know she'd want you there. Winnie didn't attend the wedding, a fact I'd never questioned, but she sent a generous gift and a kind note. From then on, the sisters maintained a careful, distant relationship. My mother never fully accepted Winnie's lifestyle, as she called it, but she didn't cut her off completely either. Their final correspondence, shortly before my mother's death, contained a surprising revelation. I was wrong about many things, my mother wrote in shaky handwriting. Including you and Patricia, I wasted years on judgment when I could have chosen understanding. Don't make the same mistake with Meredith. She'll need you someday. Had my mother somehow foreseen the disaster that would befall me? Or was it simply the wisdom that sometimes comes with facing one's mortality? The recognition of what truly matters as I replaced the letters in their ribbon binding. My phone rang. It was Zora again. The fourth call today. This time, I answered. Mom, I've been trying to reach you for days. I needed some time to think, I said, moving to the window where I could see the sunlight painting the sky in vivid oranges and pinks, so different from Ohio's perpetual gray winter clouds. Well, I've been thinking too, Zora said, her voice taking on the reasonable tone she used when trying to manage a situation. This inheritance is a blessing, obviously, but making impulsive decisions right now isn't wise. Impulsive, I repeated, like sleeping in my car for 3 months. That's exactly what I mean. You're still traumatized by what happened. You need family around you, not strangers in California. I thought of Delphine next door, who'd brought me homemade soup yesterday and introduced me to 3 other neighbors. I thought of Octavia back in Ohio, the only person who'd truly helped me when I needed it most. I'm getting to know people here, I said. The neighbors are lovely. Neighbors aren't family. Mom? No, I said, thinking of Thaddeus's notes on the refrigerator, of Zora's convenient busy schedule when I needed shelter. Sometimes they're better. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Zora spoke, her voice tight with frustration. Fine, Shaw, you want to have your little adventure. Go ahead. But don't expect us to keep your life on hold indefinitely. Thaddeus got the promotion. Remember, we're looking at houses? Real houses, not some old lady's leftover life. Her dismissal of Winnie, a woman she'd never met, who'd built a richer, more authentic life than Zora could imagine, ignited a slow-burning anger in my chest. Congratulations on Thaddeus's promotion, I said, meaning it less than she probably thought. We're actually flying out there next weekend, she said abruptly. My coffee cup paused halfway to my lips. What? We found tickets on sale. Thaddeus has some vacation days to use up before the end of the year. We thought we'd come see this famous house. Help you get your head on straight. Maybe look at the real estate market while we're there. Help me get my head on straight. As if moving from homelessness to home ownership represented confused thinking rather than miraculous good fortune. I don't think that's a good idea, Zora. Why not we're family? We want to see where you're living. Make sure you're safe. And frankly, Mom, some of the things you've been saying lately worry us. This whole cutting off contact thing isn't like you. It wasn't like the old me. She was right about that. The old me would have been grateful for any attention, any suggestion that I mattered enough to worry about. The old me would have spent the week cleaning frantically and shopping for groceries I couldn't afford to make sure Zora and Thaddeus felt welcomed and comfortable. But the old me had slept in a car for 3 months while her daughter planned nursery renovations. "When are you arriving?" I asked. "Saturday afternoon. We'll get a hotel near you, somewhere nice. Thaddeus found this great place that's not too expensive if we use his work discount." Of course. They'd stay in a hotel, not because my house wasn't big enough. Winnie's guest room was lovely, but because staying with me would require acknowledging that this was actually my home, not just a temporary delusion they needed to cure me of. "I'll pick you up at the airport," I heard myself say. "Perfect. Oh, Mom, you'll see. Once you spend some time with us, remember what you're missing. You'll realize this whole California thing is just grief talking. Grief makes people do strange things." After I hung up, I sat on the porch for a long time, watching Delphine work in her garden. Eventually, she noticed my stillness and came over to the low fence that separated our yards. "Everything all right, honey? You look like you've seen a ghost." "My daughter's coming to visit." Delphine's face brightened. "How wonderful, you must be excited." "I should be, but you're not." I found myself telling Delphine about the phone call, about Zora's assumption that I was having some kind of breakdown that needed correcting, about Thaddeus's opinions and their plans to help me get my head on straight. Delphine listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding and understanding. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, pruning sheer idle in her hands. "You know," she said finally, "Winnie went through something similar when she first moved here. Her sister, your mother, I suppose, came to visit about 6 months after Winnie and Patricia bought this house, came with her husband and a whole lot of opinions about Winnie's lifestyle choices." I'd never heard this story. "What happened?" "Oh, they had quite the visit. Lots of suggestions about how Winnie should live, who she should be. They stayed 3 days and spent most of it trying to convince her to move back to Ohio, find a nice man, live a normal life." Delphine snipped a dead rose with more force than necessary. Winnie told me afterward that she learned something important that week. "What?" "That love doesn't try to change you back into who you used to be. Real love celebrates who you're becoming." I pondered those words as I went back inside, climbing the stairs to Winnie's study, my study now. Seated at the desk, I opened my laptop and began searching for local hardware stores. I needed new locks for the front and back doors. Good ones. The kind that couldn't be easily bypassed. 3 weeks in California had changed me in ways I was only beginning to understand. My skin had lost the gray pallor of Ohio winter and homeless nights. My shoulders no longer carried the permanent hunch of someone expecting disappointment. When I caught my reflection in Winnie's antique mirrors, I saw glimpses of the woman I'd been before the flood, before Thaddeus's passive-aggressive notes, before I'd learned to make myself small enough to fit into other people's definition of convenient. I'd started each morning with coffee on the front porch, watching Delphine tend her garden next door. She'd wave and call out updates about neighborhood happenings, the Garcia's new baby, the Johnsons' kitchen renovation, the book club that met every Thursday at the community center. Ordinary life. The kind I'd forgotten existed during my months of survival mode. The house itself was becoming mine through small daily choices. I'd moved Winnie's collection of mystery novels to make room for the few books I'd salvaged from the flood. I'd rearranged the kitchen to suit my left-handed cooking style. Most significantly, I'd hung my mother's quilt, the only piece of family history I'd managed to save, on the living room wall, where afternoon light would catch its faded colors. My phone had been mercifully quiet for days after I'd stopped responding to Zora's increasingly frantic messages. But this morning, as I sat with my coffee watching Delphine deadhead her roses, it rang with Zora's number. "Mom, thank God. I've been worried sick." "I'm fine, Zora. Just settling in." "Settling in? What do you mean settling in? You can't just disappear to California and expect us not to worry. Willow keeps asking where Grandma went." The mention of Willow sent a familiar pang through my chest. My granddaughter's sweet face, her delight in simple games and bedtime stories. But even that love had been filtered through Zora's convenience visits scheduled around her social calendar. Interactions monitored for signs that I might be staying too long or expecting too much. "How is Willow?" I asked. "She's fine, but that's not the point. The point is you running away instead of dealing with reality." Reality. As if my reality, homelessness, illness, desperation had ever mattered to her. "Thaddeus and I have been talking, and we think you should come home immediately. This whole California thing is just escapism." Thaddeus and I have been talking, as if Thaddeus's opinion about my life mattered, as if the man who'd made me feel unwelcome in my own daughter's home had any right to judge my choices. What reality am I avoiding exactly? You can't just play house in some dead woman's home and pretend your real life doesn't exist. You have responsibilities here. Family here. I had no family when I was sleeping in my car. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. That was temporary. We were figuring things out. For 3 months, Zora, I was homeless for 3 months while you figured things out. And now you're not. Problem solved. So sell the house, take the money, and come home where you belong." Where I belonged. In Zora's world. I belonged at wherever was most convenient for her. Close enough to provide free babysitting and holiday help. Distant enough not to interfere with her real life. "I like it here," I said simply. "You don't even know anyone there." "I'm getting to know people. The neighbors are lovely. Neighbors aren't family." "Mom." "No," I've been thinking of Delphine's daily waves, of the woman at the hardware store who'd spent an hour helping me choose the right paint for the front porch, of the book club members who'd already invited me to join them. Sometimes they're better. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. "Finally, Zora spoke, her voice tight with frustration. "Fine. You want to have your little adventure? Go ahead. But don't expect us to keep your life on hold indefinitely." Thaddeus got the promotion. Remember, we're looking at houses. Real houses, not some old lady's leftover life. "Congratulations on Thaddeus's promotion," I said, meaning it less than she probably thought. "We're actually flying out there next weekend." My coffee cup paused halfway to my lips. "What?" "We found tickets on sale. Thaddeus has some vacation days to use up before the end of the year. We thought we'd come see this famous house. Help you get your head on straight. Maybe look at the real estate market while we're there." Help me get my head on straight. As if moving from homelessness to home ownership represented confused thinking rather than miraculous good fortune. "I don't think that's a good idea, Zora." "Why not? We're family. We want to see where you're living, make sure you're safe, and frankly, Mom, some of the things you've been saying lately worry us. This whole cutting off contact thing isn't like you." It wasn't like the old me. She was right about that. The old me would have been grateful for any attention, any suggestion that I mattered enough to worry about. The old me would have spent the week cleaning frantically and shopping for groceries I couldn't afford to make sure Zora and Thaddeus felt welcomed and comfortable. But the old me had slept in a car for 3 months while her daughter planned nursery renovations. "When are you arriving?" I asked. "Saturday afternoon. We'll get a hotel near you. Somewhere nice. Thaddeus found this great place that's not too expensive if we use his work discount." Of course, they'd stay in a hotel, not because my house wasn't big enough, Winnie's guest room was lovely, but because staying with me would require acknowledging that this was actually my home, not just a temporary delusion they needed to cure me of. "I'll pick you up at the airport," I heard myself say. "Perfect." "Oh, Mom, you'll see. Once you spend some time with us, remember what you're missing. You'll realize this whole California thing is just grief talking. Grief makes people do strange things." After I hung up, I sat on the porch for a long time, watching Delphine work in her garden. Eventually, she noticed my stillness and came over to the low fence that separated our yards. "Everything all right, honey? You look like you've seen a ghost." "My daughter's coming to visit." Delphine's face brightened. "How wonderful, you must be excited." "I should be, but I'm not." I found myself telling Delphine about the phone call, about Zora's assumption that I was having some kind of breakdown that needed correcting, about Thaddeus's opinions and their plans to help me get my head on straight. Delphine listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding and understanding. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, pruning shears idle in her hands. You know, she said finally, Winnie went through something similar when she first moved here. Her sister, your mother, I suppose came to visit about 6 months after Winnie and Patricia bought this house, came with her husband and a whole lot of opinions about Winnie's lifestyle choices. I'd never heard this story. What happened? Oh, they had quite the visit. Lots of suggestions about how Winnie should live, who she should be. They stayed 3 days and spent most of it trying to convince her to move back to Ohio, find a nice man, live a normal life. Delphine snipped a dead rose with more force than necessary. Winnie told me afterward that she learned something important that week. What? That love doesn't try to change you back into who you used to be. Real love celebrates who you're becoming. That afternoon, I drove to a hardware store in a neighboring town, one where nobody knew me yet. I bought new locks for the front and back doors, good ones, the kind that couldn't be easily bypassed. The elderly man behind the counter, Lloyd Barnett, helped me choose the right tools and gave me detailed instructions for installation. Changing locks is one of the most empowering things a woman can do, he said as he rang up my purchase. Makes a house truly yours. I spent the evening installing the new locks, working slowly and carefully with Winnie's toolbox and Lloyd's instructions. It was satisfying work, requiring focus and precision that left no room for anxiety about the coming weekend. When I finished, I stood in the entryway, turning my new keys in their new locks, listening to the solid click of tumblers falling into place. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. Saturday morning. I woke early and spent extra time getting ready. I chose my outfit carefully, a blue dress I'd bought the week before, the first new clothing I'd purchased in months. It fit well and made me look competent, settled, like a woman who belonged in her own home. I'd spent the week preparing for Zora and Thaddeus's visit, but not in the frantic, people-pleasing way I might have before. Instead, I'd continued making the house mine. I painted the kitchen a warm yellow that reminded me of summer mornings. I planted herbs in pots for the kitchen windowsill. I joined Delphine's book club and met 5 women my age who welcomed me without question or judgment. These small acts of claiming space felt revolutionary after months of having none. The airport was chaos, holiday travelers and delayed flights creating an atmosphere of barely controlled stress. I found Zora and Thaddeus at baggage claim, both looking tired and irritated from their journey. Zora hugged me briefly, then stepped back to study my face with the kind of scrutiny usually reserved for suspicious packages. You look different, she said. I look rested, I replied. Thaddeus gave me a perfunctory hug and immediately began complaining about the flight, the airport, the California traffic he'd heard horror stories about. I listened politely as I led them to my car, not the old Honda, which I traded for a reliable used Prius the week before. Nice car, Thaddeus said with surprise. The inheritance must have been bigger than you told Zora. It was a casual comment, but it revealed everything. They weren't here out of concern for my well-being. They were here to assess my assets, to understand exactly what I'd inherited and how it might benefit them. Big enough, I said, echoing my previous non-answer to Zora. During the drive to their hotel, Zora kept up a steady stream of chatter about their house hunt, Thaddeus's promotion, their expanding family plans. It was clear they'd rehearsed this presentation, designed to remind me of everything I was supposedly missing by staying in California. We found this amazing house, Zora said. 4 bedrooms, perfect for our growing family. The only problem is, it's a bit of a stretch financially, even with Thaddeus's raise. We're thinking about asking family for help with the down payment. There it was, the real reason for their visit, delivered with the practiced casualness of people who'd learned to wrap requests for money and concern about family obligations. I pulled into the hotel parking lot and helped them with their luggage, agreeing to pick them up for dinner in 2 hours. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of them in my rearview mirror, standing close together on the sidewalk, clearly discussing strategy for the evening ahead. But I had strategies of my own now. I was no longer the desperate woman who'd been grateful for 6 weeks of grudging shelter. I was someone with a home, with choices, with the power to say no. Dinner at Pasadena's finest restaurant had been Thaddeus's suggestion, a place expensive enough to demonstrate that they weren't struggling financially, just strategically seeking help with their investment in a forever home. Zora had worn her newest dress, and Thaddeus had spent the first 20 minutes discussing his promotion in terms that suggested he was practically running the company now. I'd listened politely, making appropriate sounds of congratulation while watching them perform their careful choreography of success. They were good at it, I had to admit, the perfect young couple with expanding dreams that just needed a little family support to become reality. The house we're looking at is really an investment, Thaddeus explained as he cut his steak with surgical precision. Property values in that neighborhood have increased 30% in the last 5 years. With the new baby coming, we need the space, but we're also thinking long-term, building wealth for the family. It sounds wonderful, I said. Zora leaned forward, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. I wish you could see it, Mom. It has this incredible kitchen with an island, and the master suite has a sitting area that would be perfect for nursing the baby. The backyard is huge. Willow would have so much room to play. And there's a separate living space over the garage, Thaddeus added casually. Perfect for extended family visits. You could stay as long as you wanted when you come to visit. Extended family visits. A polite way of saying I could be a guest in their home when they needed something, but never truly welcome to stay. The carrot to go with the stick they'd been wielding since my arrival in California. How much help are you looking for? I asked directly. They exchanged a glance so quick I might have missed it 3 months ago. But homelessness had taught me to read the subtle communications between people who saw me as a problem to be managed. Well, Zora said carefully, we were hoping for maybe $50,000, $60,000 at the most, just for the down payment. We'd pay you back. Of course, once Thaddeus's next promotion comes through, $60,000 more than I'd had in my bank account in my entire life before Winnie's inheritance. Money they'd calculated I could afford because they'd done the math on my new circumstances without ever asking about my plans for the future. That's a significant amount, I said. But you have it, Thaddeus said, his tone suggesting this made the decision obvious. And it's family. This is what family does for each other. Family. The word they'd weaponized since my arrival in California, using it to justify their assumption that my inheritance should solve their problems. Tell me about Willow, I said, changing the subject. How is she adjusting to the idea of being a big sister? Zora's face softened immediately. Oh, she's so excited. She keeps patting my belly and talking to the baby. Yesterday, she told me she wants to teach the baby how to color. For a moment, I saw my daughter as she'd been when Willow was born, exhausted but glowing, so proud of her perfect baby girl. Before Thaddeus's promotion became her primary concern, before house hunting consumed her weekends, before my homelessness became an inconvenience to be managed. I miss her, I said quietly. Then come home, Zora said immediately. That's what we've been trying to tell you. Willow needs her grandmother. This new baby will need you too. You're running away from the people who love you most. Am I because when I was sleeping in my car, neither of you seemed to think Willow needed her grandmother very badly? Thaddeus's jaw tightened. That's not fair. Meredith, we offered you our guest room for 6 weeks until I became inconvenient. You weren't inconvenient. You were, he paused, clearly searching for diplomatic language. You were going through a difficult time. Sometimes people in crisis need professional help, not just family support. Professional help, as if my homelessness had been a mental health crisis rather than the natural result of losing everything in a flood and having nowhere else to go. I wasn't having a breakdown. Thaddeus, I was having a housing crisis. And now you're not, Zora said brightly. So let's move forward. You have this beautiful inheritance. We have this amazing opportunity with the house. And Willow has grandparents who want to be part of her life. It all works out perfectly. I excused myself to the restroom, needing a moment away from their carefully orchestrated presentation. In the mirror, I looked at the woman I'd become, no longer hollow-cheeked and desperate, but not yet entirely sure of her own power. I thought about Winnie and Patricia, who'd built a life together based on mutual respect and genuine affection. I thought about Delphine, who'd chosen to befriend a stranger simply because kindness was her nature. And I thought about the new locks on my doors, the keys that belonged only to me. When I returned to the table, Thaddeus was showing Zora something on his phone, photos of the house they wanted to buy, probably, or mortgage calculators that demonstrated how my money would make their dreams possible. "I'd like to see where you're living," Zora said as I sat down. "Tomorrow, before we fly back." "Of course, maybe we could stay the night," Thaddeus suggested. "Save on the hotel bill, get a real feel for the neighborhood." There was the assumption that my home was available to them, that my space could be occupied without permission because we were family and family didn't need to ask. "I'm sorry, but that won't be possible," I said. "Why not?" Zora's eyebrows drew together in confusion. "Is the house not habitable or something?" "The house is perfectly habitable. I just prefer to keep my own space." "But we're your family," Thaddeus said, as if this explained everything. "Yes, you are, and you have a hotel room." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. I could see Zora processing this refusal, trying to understand how the mother who'd accepted sleeping in a car rather than impose on anyone had suddenly developed boundaries. "You're being ridiculous," she said finally. "We flew all the way out here to see you, and you won't even let us stay one night in your house. You flew out here to assess my inheritance and convince me to give you money for yours." Thaddeus's face flushed red. "That's not... We're concerned about you. You're not acting like yourself." "You're right," I said. "I'm acting like someone who's learned the difference between being wanted and being useful." Zora's eyes filled with tears. Real ones, I thought, though I was no longer certain I could tell the difference. "How can you say that you're my mother? I love you." "I know you do. But your love comes with conditions I'm no longer willing to meet." "What conditions? What are you talking about?" "The condition that I be grateful for whatever scraps of attention you're willing to give me. The condition that I not expect too much, ask for too much, need too much. The condition that my needs always come second to your convenience." I reached for my purse, pulling out my wallet to pay for dinner. It was a small gesture, but symbolic. I was no longer someone who needed others to pick up the check. "I'll drive you back to your hotel," I said. The ride was silent, except for Zora's occasional snuffles and Thaddeus's muttered complaints about California traffic. When I pulled up to their hotel entrance, Zora turned to me with the expression she'd perfected as a teenager, part wounded innocence, part manipulative desperation. "Mom, please don't let some old woman's house come between us. Don't let money change who we are as a family." Some old woman's house, as if Winnie had been nothing more than a convenient benefactor, as if her carefully preserved home was just a windfall to be liquidated. Money didn't change who we are, Zora. It revealed who we've always been. Thaddeus got out of the car without a word, but Zora lingered, her hand on the door handle. "We'll come by tomorrow morning before our flight," she said. "Maybe you'll feel differently after you've had time to think." "Maybe," I said, though we both knew I wouldn't. That night, I sat on Winnie's front porch with a cup of tea, watching the neighborhood settle into evening quiet. Delphine's house was dark. She'd mentioned going to her daughter's for the weekend, but other windows glowed with warm light. Families going about their Sunday evening routines. My phone buzzed with a text from Zora. "I love you, Mom. I hope you remember that." I typed and deleted a dozen responses before settling on, "I love you too. That's why this hurts so much." But I didn't send it. Instead, I turned off my phone and went inside, locking my new locks behind me. Tomorrow would bring the final confrontation. The moment when I would have to choose between the family I'd been born into and the life I was building for myself. For the first time since Zora's call announcing their visit, I felt ready for that choice. I'd spent months learning to survive on scraps of shelter, of dignity, of love. I'd forgotten that I deserved better, until Winnie's inheritance reminded me that some people understand the difference between charity and care, between obligation and genuine affection. In the morning, Zora and Thaddeus would arrive expecting the mother and mother-in-law they'd always known grateful, accommodating, willing to sacrifice for their happiness. Instead, they would meet the woman I was becoming, someone who understood her own worth, someone who'd learned that the most radical act of self-love is refusing to accept less than you deserve. The locks were changed. The boundaries were set. Tomorrow, I would discover whether love could survive the loss of convenient exploitation, or whether some relationships only work when one person holds all the power. I woke before dawn and made coffee in Winnie's kitchen, my kitchen now watching the sky lighten over the San Gabriel Mountains. In a few hours, Zora and Thaddeus would arrive for what they undoubtedly expected to be a final negotiation. One last chance to convince the confused old woman to see reason and remember her family obligations. But I wasn't confused. For the first time in months, possibly years, I saw everything with perfect clarity. By 9:00, I was dressed and ready. I'd chosen my clothes with the same care I'd taken the day before the navy dress that made me look competent and successful, paired with the pearl earrings Winnie had left in her jewelry box. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who belonged in this house, who'd earned her place in this life. Delphine had returned from her daughter's house the night before, and I could see her moving around her kitchen, probably preparing for the day ahead. Part of me wanted to tell her what was coming, to have an ally nearby when the confrontation began. But this was something I needed to handle alone. At 9:47, a rental car pulled into my driveway. Zora and Thaddeus emerged looking tired and slightly hungover. Too much wine with dinner as they'd planned their strategy. Perhaps. Thaddeus carried a briefcase, which struck me as both pathetic and telling. He'd brought documentation to a family visit, papers to support whatever argument they'd rehearsed. I opened the door before they could knock, stepping onto the porch instead of inviting them inside. "Good morning," I said pleasantly. "How was your hotel?" "Fine," Zora said, her eyes scanning the house behind me as if looking for an opening to slip past my guard. "Can we come in? We don't have much time before our flight." "Actually, I think the porch is perfect for our conversation." Thaddeus's jaw tightened with irritation. "Meredith, it's 40 degrees out here. It's 58 degrees and sunny, quite pleasant for December." I settled into one of the wicker chairs Winnie had arranged for watching sunsets. After a moment's hesitation, Zora and Thaddeus took the remaining chairs, though both looked uncomfortable with this outdoor negotiation. "Mom," Zora began, her voice taking on the patient tone she'd probably practiced. "We talked after dinner last night, and we want to apologize if we came on too strong about the house thing. We know you're still adjusting to your new situation." My new situation, as if inheriting a beautiful home and financial security was a medical condition that needed managing. "I'm adjusting quite well, actually." "That's wonderful," Thaddeus said, opening his briefcase with unnecessary flourish. "But we wanted to make sure you're thinking about the big picture. Long-term planning. You know, at your age, it's important to consider how to maximize your assets." At my age, I was 62, not 92, but in Thaddeus's mind, I was apparently too elderly to make financial decisions without his guidance. "What kind of long-term planning did you have in mind?" Thaddeus pulled out a folder thick with papers, printouts of real estate listings, mortgage calculations, investment projections. He'd done his homework. I had to give him that. "Well, for starters, this house is way too big for one person. The maintenance costs alone must be eating into your inheritance and California taxes." He shook his head as if personally wounded by the state's tax structure. "You could sell this place, buy something smaller and more practical in Ohio, and still have hundreds of thousands left over to help your family build wealth." "Help my family build wealth," I repeated slowly. "Exactly." Zora leaned forward eagerly. "It's about creating generational wealth. What's the point of having all this money if it just sits here while your family struggles with mortgages and daycare costs? Are you struggling, Zora?" She blinked, apparently not expecting the direct question. "Well, no, Not struggling exactly, but with the baby coming and Thaddeus's career trajectory, we need to position ourselves for success. The house we want isn't just about us. It's about creating the right environment for Willow and the new baby. Good schools, safe neighborhood, room to grow. And you think I should subsidize this positioning? We think you should invest in your grandchildren's future, Thaddeus said smoothly. Instead of rattling around in some dead woman's house playing make-believe about starting over at 62, the silence that followed his words was absolute. Even the morning birds seemed to have paused their singing. Zora's face went pale as she realized Thaddeus had crossed a line they'd probably agreed he wouldn't cross. "Thaddeus," she said quietly. "No, let him finish," I said, my voice steady despite the fury building in my chest. "I'm curious about this make-believe life I'm apparently living." Thaddeus, emboldened by what he mistook for calm acceptance, leaned back in his chair. "Look, Meredith, I get it. You've had a rough few months, the flood, the temporary housing situation. It was all very traumatic. But you can't just run away to California and pretend to be someone you're not. You're a grandmother from Ohio, not some California lifestyle woman. This whole thing is just postponing the inevitable return to reality. And what reality is that? That you belong near your family, that your purpose is supporting the next generation, not playing house with someone else's life." There it was, the truth underneath all their careful maneuvering. In Thaddeus's mind, my value was entirely utilitarian. I existed to provide free childcare, holiday hosting, and now financial support for their ambitions. The idea that I might have my own dreams, my own right to happiness, was literally inconceivable to him. I looked at Zora, who was staring at her hands, unwilling to meet my eyes. She wasn't disagreeing with Thaddeus's assessment. She was just embarrassed that he'd stated it so baldly. "You know what's interesting?" I said conversationally. 3 months ago, I would have agreed with you. I would have sold this house, moved back to Ohio, and handed you whatever money you asked for. I would have been grateful that you still wanted me in your lives, even after proving how much of a burden I could be. "Mom," Zora started, but I held up a hand. "But then I learned something important. Do you know what it was?" Neither of them answered. "I learned that some people invite you into their lives, and some people just tolerate your presence until it becomes inconvenient. I learned the difference between being loved and being useful." I stood up, smoothing my dress, feeling the solid weight of my house key in my pocket. "Zora, I love you. I love Willow. I will love the new baby. But I won't subsidize your life while you treat you as disposable." "We're not treating your life as disposable," Zora protested, finally looking up. "We want you to be part of our lives. That's what this whole conversation is about." "No, this conversation is about you wanting my money. If you wanted me to be part of your lives, you wouldn't have let me sleep in my car for 3 months while you shopped for bigger houses." Thaddeus snorted derisively. "Here we go again with the car thing. You act like we threw you out on the street. You didn't throw me out. You just made it clear I wasn't welcome to stay because you were—" I caught myself. "I was what?" "Thaddeus, you were going through something we couldn't fix," Zora said quickly. "We thought some space might help you get perspective. And now I have perspective. I can see quite clearly that you view my inheritance as a solution to your problems, rather than my reward for surviving yours." I walked to the edge of the porch, looking out at the neighborhood Winnie and Patricia had chosen for their life together. Delphine was watering her plants, and she waved when she saw me. I waved back, feeling the simple pleasure of being seen and acknowledged by someone who expected nothing from me but friendliness. "So, what happens now?" Zora asked, and I could hear real fear in her voice for the first time. "Now you go catch your flight home. You buy whatever house you can afford on Thaddeus's salary. You raise your children and build your life without expecting me to bankroll it." "And us," Zora's voice was small. "What happens to us?" I turned back to face her, seeing not the manipulative woman who'd orchestrated this weekend's performance, but the little girl who'd once crawled into my bed during thunderstorms, seeking comfort and reassurance. "That depends entirely on whether you can love me without expecting me to be grateful for the privilege. Whoosh, Thaddeus was gathering his papers, his face red with anger and frustration. This is ridiculous. You're throwing away your family over money. I'm not throwing away anything. Thaddeus, I'm refusing to purchase love that should be freely given. Fine, he snapped, standing abruptly. But don't come crying to us when this California fantasy falls apart and you're alone with nothing but your pride. I've been alone before, I said quietly. It's not as frightening as you think. Zora stood more slowly, tears streaming down her face. For a moment, I thought she might apologize, might acknowledge what they'd done to me and what they'd tried to do this weekend. Instead, she wiped her eyes and lifted her chin with a gesture I recognized from her childhood defensive pride, masquerading as strength. I hope you're happy, she said. I'm getting there. I stood on the porch and watched them load their luggage into the rental car. Zora looked back once as they pulled out of the driveway, but Thaddeus stared straight ahead, already planning his next strategy. No doubt, after they disappeared around the corner, I sat back down in Winnie's chair and pulled out my phone. I had 17 missed calls and 43 text messages, but I deleted them all without reading them. Instead, I opened my contacts and scrolled to a number I'd memorized but never used. Mr. Blackwood answered on the second ring. Meredith, how are you settling in? Very well, thank you. I have a question about making changes to my will. There was a brief pause. Of course, what kind of changes? I want to establish a scholarship fund for women over 50 who are starting over after losing everything. And I want to leave the house to someone who will appreciate what Winnie and Patricia built here. I can draft something for you. Do you have a beneficiary in mind? I looked over at Delphine's house, where she was now deadheading roses with the patient care of someone who understood that beautiful things required tending. Yes, I said. I think I do. That evening, I called the book club Delphine had mentioned and asked about joining. The woman who answered, Anna Whitmire, seemed delighted to welcome a new member. We're reading Late Bloomers next month, she said. Stories about women who found their power later in life. You'll fit right in. As the sun set over the San Gabriel Mountains, I sat on my porch with Winnie's copy of the book, reading about women who discovered that the second half of life could be entirely different from the first. The phone was silent. No frantic calls from Zora, no guilt-inducing messages about family obligations. The silence felt like freedom. Tomorrow I would start planning the scholarship fund. I would plant some flowers of my own. I would host the book club in a living room where my mother's quilt caught the afternoon light. I would live a life of my own choosing, surrounded by people who saw my presence as a gift rather than a burden. And if Zora and Thaddeus ever learned to love without conditions, without expectations of financial return, they would be welcome in that life. But if they didn't, I would be just fine without them. The woman who'd slept in a car for 3 months was gone. In her place was someone who understood that dignity, once reclaimed, was worth more than any family's approval. The doors were locked, the will was changed, and I was finally, completely home. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. If you enjoyed this story, check out 2 other channel favorites. My son's wife called me Just the Grandmother, and after 40 years of marriage, my husband said I was too old.